Volume 1, Chapter 6 of The Female American, or The Adventures of Unca Eliza Winkfield. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. The thoughts of her distress occasion a severe fever. Recovers, seeks comfort in her own reflections. As I had now settled my manner of living, I was very easy on that head, till this reflection destroyed all my peace. 'Tis true I am well provided for the present, whilst the summer and fine weather continue. I can with little difficulty, or rather amusement, supply myself with fish, flesh, and fowl. But winter no doubt will come, and how severe that season may prove I cannot foretell. How shall I, during the inclemency of it, procure the means of subsistence? There will be less plenty of birds. The gum, which now spontaneously issues from the trees, will then fail. The sands on the coast, being more frequently and violently agitated, will be unsafe, and my supplies from thence less, perhaps none. The goats will also yield little or no milk, and the rain perhaps may continue for many days, nay, weeks, and confine me entirely to my cell. Such were the anxious, perplexing thoughts that agitated my mind, and the fear of the future destroyed the enjoyment of the present. I sat dissolved in sighs and tears, and indulged my melancholy, till the night drew on, when I laid down, but not to rest, and so greatly was my mind afflicted that it brought on a violent fever, attended with a delirium. I raved, I cried, I laughed by turns. I soon became so weak that I was scarce able to crawl from my bed to get some water, of which I happened to have plenty. As my thirst was great, I drank freely of it, but as the fever continued 3 days, I was now reduced to my last shellful of water. I had at this time an interval of sense, when I found I was too weak to get out of my cell to fetch more, yet my thirst forced me to drink this, which I did, supposing it would be my last, and that death must be my next potion. I soon emptied the shell, and as well as I was able, and with as much resignation as I could, laid me down to die. It was not long before I fell asleep for the first time since the fever came on me. How long I slept I could not tell, but awoke in a great sweat, and found my thirst as great as ever, and to such an intolerable degree that I determined, if possible, to attempt going to the river to drink, though I died in the way, for death itself was more eligible than the thirst I suffered. With much difficulty I raised myself up and got upon the ground, but was obliged to crawl upon my hands and feet, and to rest very often by the way before I reached the river. Surely deliverance itself could not have given me greater pleasure than the sight of the water. I greedily thought there would be scarce enough to assuage my raging thirst. I laid myself flat on the edge, and whilst I drank, had the additional pleasure of cooling my hands and face. At length my thirst was happily allayed, but the river was not dried up. The coolness of the water was so agreeable to my hands and face that I thought I would wash my feet, as they burnt with no less fierceness. To do this, I was obliged to seat myself on the bank. It was with much labor and difficulty I did so, but had scarce placed myself when either the bank broke down or I slipped, and into the water I fell, and plunged all over. Whether the water by its coolness braced my nerves and gave me strength, or how I know not, but I soon reared my head above the surface, and crawled upon the shore. When my weakness again returned, and I fell all along, unable to stir, expecting to die every moment. At last I fell into a deep sleep, I suppose for some hours, when I awoke in a violent sweat. I was still thirsty, but not so painfully as before, and even found myself refreshed. I was fearful to have recourse to the river, lest I should fall into it again, when, observing a she-goat very near me, I made shift to creep softly to her and suck her dugs, which she happily permitted. This was at first a comfortable relief, but I soon after grew very sick and vomited violently. But I found that my fever was quite gone off and that I was no longer thirsty. Reflecting on the great escape I had from drowning and the favorable change in my health, whereas the mere circumstance of being immersed in the water in the condition I was might have proved instant death, I lifted up my heart unto God and unfeignedly thanked him for his mercy. I now attempted to get up and crawl to my cell, but found myself too weak to do either. All I could do was to sit up sometimes a little. The sun indeed dried my clothes apace, but its heat was too violent to bear long. I was forced, therefore, to crawl a little way under the shade of some trees that grew on the banks of the river, but this I was long performing, though not above 2 or 3 yards off. The shade of the trees protecting me from the sun's scorching beams, and the cool breezes which came upon me from the river refreshing me greatly, I once more fell asleep. When awaked, I was greatly but agreeably surprised to find how much better I was. My clothes were quite dry, and now I hoped I might be able to get to my cell, for I saw the sun was setting. Though I was not thirsty, I could have been glad of some more milk, but there was no goat near me, for notwithstanding the milk had made me sick, yet I believe it contributed to my recovery by clearing my stomach. I once more attempted to crawl home, for I could do no more, and glad was I to do so. At last I reached my cell, much fatigued and very weak, and greatly in want of some refreshment. I soon recollected that there was some of that wine left that I drank the first day I came, and made shift to reach it, but having no water to mix with it, I drank a very little of it, and that little was too strong for my stomach to stay in. Still finding my stomach empty and uneasy, I, at last, remembered my root bread. I cut a slice of it and soaked it in the wine. I ate sparingly of it and found it agreed with me and refreshed me greatly. The rest of it I laid by my couch and bit a piece of it now and then, for I lay awake most part of the night, but free from both thirst and fever. Towards morning I slept soundly, and when I awaked I was much surprised to find how my strength was recruited, or rather my weakness abated. I got up and most heartily thanked God for my recovery, and with the help of 2 sticks made shift to walk, though slowly. I reached some of the yellow fruit with which I used to entice the goats, and laid it before the door, in hopes that the goats would see it, for I could not walk in search of them, putting some stones upon the boughs, that they might not drag them away. At last a she-goat came, and I milked her, and drank a large shell of it, with a little bit of my root bread. This agreed extremely well with my stomach. I continued this practice for about a week, once a day, drinking a little wine with water, and thus once more happily recovered my health and my strength to such a degree that I could now walk about and do my little business, and in a week or more was as well and almost as strong as before. I had now been upon this place for a month, for as I had an almanac with me, I kept an exact amount of time, that I might be sure to conceal myself on the day the Indians were to arrive, as cautioned by the hermit's manuscript. Being thus recovered, I could not but reflect that I owed my late sickness to my giving way to those anxious, corroding cares that had arisen in my mind concerning my future subsistence, and I could not but condemn my folly and mourn for the sinfulness of it, and of which, I hope, I heartily repented. My dear uncle was a great recommender of meditation. "That man," said he, "hardly knows that he is a thinking being who does not often meditate by himself. It is," said he, "a glorious privilege, and he who practices it will grow wiser and better by an hour's serious meditation than by a month's reading. We should," continued he, "be often inculcating upon our minds the truths we know, and they will become fixed. We should often rebuke, advise, and console ourselves, and we shall become better men, more prudent and more contented." I was so strongly convinced of the reasonableness and utility of this practice that I adopted it, and according to his further advice, used to talk to myself aloud, as the occasion required, as I would do to another, and that with all the force of argument, vehemence, and energy of expression I could, or as the nature of the subject required. Upon these occasions I have been frequently surprised to find how my understanding has been convinced, my affections moved, and my will determined. I have assented to a truth I never before believed, wept at the conviction of a fault, and have found a consolation in a time of trouble that I did not expect. On these occasions it was always my custom to imagine to myself that my uncle was speaking to me. This, I thought, as it were, inspired me, and gave an energy to my words, strength to my arguments, and commanded my attention. I have sometimes indulged this reverie to such a degree that I have really imagined, at last, that my uncle was speaking to me. By reflecting on my late sickness and the occasion of it, I was led into one of these soliloquies, and thus, in the imagined person of my uncle, did I address myself. In vain, I find, are the precepts that I so often inculcated on your mind. They have not reached your heart, and, I fear, are erased from your memory. It was very easy in the day of prosperity to hear instructions how to bear adversity, but in the hour of calamity they are forgotten. From the days of your infancy, the smiles of Providence almost constantly attended you. You were too young at your mother's death long to feel her loss, and that of your father's was the most poignant. Indeed, to be at once deprived of your great affluence and secluded from human society are afflictions not of a light weight. But still, could you find no consolation? The dread of approaching winter, in your situation, might alarm, but sure, at your first coming on this island, you had no less reason, surely more so, to be alarmed for your then immediate preservation. Yet what favorable circumstances have intervened, and such as, if properly improved, may prevent the calamities you dread? How preferable is your condition to that of those consigned to slavery for life, forced to bear with accumulated evils utterly unknown to you, slaves to a tyrant and the subjects of unrelenting cruelty. Ah, Eliza, would we but compare our sufferings with those of others, where would the wretch be found who would not have something wherewith to console himself? How many voluntarily quitted the advantages of society to avoid the temptations of it, in a worse retirement than yours? Thus might I reason with a heathen, and I think not without success. But is not Unca a Christian, or would be such? Receive then the instructions of a higher school, and learn of a better master. Remember him who through sufferings was made perfect, and that the disciple is not to be above his master. Let then your whole life be one continual aphorontes eis tein Iesun. The greater your calamities, the greater should be your trust and confidence in God. He who relies most on his providence glorifies him most. We should never neglect the use of means whilst in our power, but when they fail, we must still look up to him who needs them not, for when we have done our utmost, we must not despair, as though God's power was cut off from ours. No, at such a time we must commit ourselves and our wants to him, with a firm persuasion that he will help us. If we make him the object of our faith and prayers, we shall become the subjects of his mercy. Remember, godliness hath the promise of this life, as well of that which is to come. But always be mindful that we are to commit ourselves to him by a patient continuance in well-doing. No imaginary flights of faith will warrant our confidence in him. Nothing will do unless we prove ourselves to be his servants by keeping his commands. For true saving faith always produces good works. Believe and obey, Be thankful to God for the mercies you enjoy, and trust in Him for those you want. The citizen may be wretched, and the solitary happy. Human felicity or misery is confined to no place or circumstance of life. The servant of God is safe wheresoever or howsoever he be. Humble thyself, therefore, under the almighty hand of God, and he shall exalt thee in due time. Let not your care for this present life make you neglect that of a future one. Should your body die here, your soul will not find the way to heaven the more difficult. Though the cloud of affliction now hangs over your head, the Sun of mercy behind may dispel it, and once more show his glorious face. Believe, obey, and trust, and be saved, blessed, and delivered. Thus did I endeavor to fortify my heart, and to learn patience and resignation to the dispensations of Providence. Nor were my attempts in vain, nor did I ever again suffer such anxious cares as those from which I was just now delivered. Submission or hope, one or both, were ever in a less or greater degree my solace. End of chapter 6.